I remember learning about God. I remember hearing the stories about God. I remember singing little songs about God. And I knew about Jesus dying on the cross, but I never remember being confronted about my sins. I never remember being convicted about that I'm a sinner, or the fact even knowing what sin was per se. When I was little, I always grew up going to church from the time I could remember. Every Sunday, my parents had me in church. We'd go to Sunday school. During the summertime, I was always at vacation Bible school, or just doing something at church, throughout the week. So I never enjoyed going to church. I never liked going to church. When I woke up on Sunday mornings, I would always dread it, because I always just wanted to stay home and watch cartoons and watch TV. So when I was about 13, that's when my parents, they both kind of, for lack of a better word, they backslid, just started getting into some things that I think to a certain extent made them ashamed. And so because of the shame that they had for stuff that they were doing, they stopped going to church. And because they weren't going, they didn't make me go. I could have went if I'd have wanted to, but I chose not to. So I just kept going through that. It was, just doing me, and whatever it is that I wanted to do and made me happy, that's all I focused on. I was selfish, I was greedy, and that was pretty much what my whole life was wrapped up around. When I was about 15 or 16, I had a friend at school, kind of like out of nowhere. He just kind of got at me and was like telling me about how he got baptized at church, and so I started getting convicted by that, because I had been in church long enough. I knew what baptism was. I knew that you're supposed to do that if you're in God, you should be baptized. That with that little bit of conviction that I had, I went home and told my mom I wanted to get baptized. And so needless to say, once I got done with that, I was good. Me and God were good, and I was good with God. And I just went on about my merry old way and didn't think no more about God, didn't give 2 cents about church, didn't go set foot back in it again, was just doing what I wanted to do. So when I was about senior in high school, I would say I was probably about 17, I just started getting a conviction in my heart. Like, it was just on me, like if I was to die today, would I go to heaven? And I honestly couldn't answer that question. With all the times I had went to church, and granted, a lot of those times I didn't pay attention. I went to church enough to know that God was real, but I had never given him any real thought or given him any real priority in my life. But I knew that I needed to know about hell and how to get to heaven, because I wasn't trying to go to hell. I knew I wanted to go to heaven, but didn't know exactly how that whole process worked. But one day, and when I was about 18, it just hit me again. Like, if you were to die today, would you go to heaven? And I couldn't shake it. This time when it hit me, I couldn't. It hit me harder than it had any other time before up to this point. And so at that point, I made a real decision that I was going to start reading the Bible and finally figure out how to answer this question. Again, I didn't want to go to church. All I remembered from church was having to dress up and go to church and be bored. And so I didn't want any part of that, but I knew that I could read the Bible and figure something out. Finally, I got to the point in the Bible where I had gotten to the book of Psalms. And in the book of Psalms, it always is talking about singing praise to God and giving God glory and singing songs. And so finally, God was able to use that to he got my attention then at that point. That's what got me into church, was reading in Psalms and talking about having to sing to God. And the only place that I knew I could go to sing to God was at church. So I got with my sister, who since the time I could remember had been, even when my mom and dad had stopped going to church, my sister always went, and she was plugged into going to church. She was plugged into her youth group. So when I asked her about going to church with her, she was ecstatic. She was like, by all means, you can come to church with me. So I just started going to church with my sister. And it was actually kind of cool because I would go and listen to the preacher, and I had read enough of the Bible at this point that he would preach sermons and I knew what he was talking about. And the pastor, I remember his name to this day, is Tom Blackstone. He encouraged everybody to go home after church that day and to just meditate and think on what Jesus had done for us. So I went home and just was laying on my bed and was just thinking about Jesus dying on the cross and what that meant and him paying the price for my sin. And I just remember laying there on my bed and just this joy and this peace and this feeling that I can't describe, just overwhelming my heart, overwhelming my mind, overwhelming my senses. That was that point in my life, because from that point forward, I've walked with God. And so since that time, God has just been moving mightily in my life. God led me to the Rock. I started volunteering in bus ministry, started helping out with Chosen. And God really just, has allowed me to be a part of those ministries and bless kids and see a lot of kids and teens get saved, and it's been awesome. And also, too, I was able to meet a young lady named Linda who was also volunteering in a lot of those same ministries. And during that time and through the years, God has just kind of knit our heart together. And we're deeply in love with each other. And on December 7th, 2013, we got married. And other than getting saved, that's the greatest day of my life. One of the key verses that God has really given me for my life is Mark chapter 12, verses 30 and 31, where it basically says the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so if I could just wrap up my life, it's been based on loving God with everything that I have, and then also making myself available to God so that he could use me in some way to help other people meet Jesus the way that I met Jesus, so that they could get experience what I've been able to experience.
I was blind, but now I see.